I don't, Daniel, I don't have a question, but I just want to say, you know, with the passage of a GOA today by the House of Representatives, and the fact that it's to the Senate next week, and we expect it to be passed, so a GOA is going to become law. With infrastructure, without infrastructure, it will never achieve its goals. This is a very timely and a very important session and meeting, and something that needs to be taken very, very seriously to happen.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Walker.
That's better than a question.
It's a good comment. Your Excellencies, any questions you might have? Yes, the Ambassador of Mali.
Ambassador of Mali, I thank the presentators, and I am very, very impressed for all that I have been hearing. But then I'm ambassador of a very, very poor country, and when you speak about infrastructure, you speak about stable economic policy, long-term plan. It's just like that you have the choice to make your own decisions and to make the allocation of your budget resources between this and that, which is really not the case in countries like mine. In countries like mine, the allocation of the budget is mostly decided by IMF and the World Bank somehow. And then besides, when we invest in infrastructure, then the next question is, will the economy use it efficiently before it is completely amortized? And then comes the necessity for countries, again, like mine, to be into regional groups like ECOWAS and have regional infrastructure projects, like the one the UMOA has. UMOA had 2 years ago a very important meeting in Abidjan, having a regional project, infrastructure project for the whole UMOA. But then, as you say, most of the funding goes to South Africa and Nigeria. So what do we do? That is my question to all of them. Thank you.
Good question, Ambassador. We're going to take 3 questions and then come back to the panel. Any other questions from the ambassadors? The Ambassador of Uganda.
Thank you, Dr. Karanja. Mine is not really a question. I would like to appreciate your effort in getting us African ambassadors to engage with the team like we have with us today. In an earlier engagement where I have been, in an earlier forum, you have asked how can we get the African ambassadors into the picture of what you are dealing with every day. So I'd like to thank you for having finally made it. And now with the news that AGOA is where it is now, I think this kind of engagement it should be encouraged because many of our countries, to talk of Uganda, for example, we haven't benefited much from what AGOA has been all about. Why? Mainly because of supply side constraints where infrastructure has been a real big issue. And for now, Uganda is concentrating on energy On rail, we are in this regional project with Kenya and Rwanda on standard gauge rail. We are on roads, we are on it. So we need the conversation to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. You're welcome. Ambassador of Cabo Verde.
Thank you. First of all, I want to comment all the presentations that have been done here, and to say to the Minister Vitar that I was also grateful to recognize through his presentation most of the ingredients of the policy that my country applies in doing development. As a matter of fact, we also have a strategic plan which combines what we call conditioning factors for success through public investment, but then we moved to driver in business cluster areas for private investment and public-private partnership in different clusters. And this is a very strategic matrix that I would like not to fight poverty, but to create growth and wealth. I think it is very important that if we can even make an evolution in the conceptual phrasing, stop talking about fighting poverty, but trying to create growth and to distribute wealth in the developing country. My question is about PPP. It's not really a new concept, but it has a very hard time to be spread around, because it is a very complex engineering in order to avoid that the private sector take the profit and the public sector remain with the passive. And it is very important then, either through ODA, credit, or PPP, it is very important that funding should be accompanied with a technical assistance to manage those funds properly and to avoid those waste of 40 to 60% that you mentioned. It is something that we are doing in my country. With MCC, for instance, we have this. There is a technical board, a technical unit to implement the project just to avoid those waste. And we are doing the same. JICA is financing very important programs in Cabo Verde in the field of electricity and distribution, because we have not only fuel, but today we have 30% of renewables penetration in our country. Then it is very important that technical assistance could follow from the funding to the implementation of the project. And very often the PPP is for funding, for the execution of the project, and then for its economic governance, to bring market. If you are investing in a deep sea water port, you need to have companies to bring containers and to transfer containers from one country to another. That's very important. Then our partner, or our private partner, could bring those kinds of market. And thirdly, and I will finish there, you mentioned the question of orphans and darling countries. Very often, it's not a question of it's not because they are orphan or darling, they become orphan darling by the opportunity. And there again, you have all the countries that represent a huge market size, resource attractiveness, and a profit perspective. They are more driven to private investment. I come from a small, what I call a small middle-income country, a SMIC. Small middle-income country. It's a new concept that I'm putting on the table. They used to call it SEEDs. As a matter of fact, we have been graduated from LDCs to middle-income country, low level, in 2008. Then I'm a SMIC. But a small middle-income country, we do have strategy, we do have a political stability with one of the most prominent democracy and rule of law country. We have the 5th country in infrastructure in Africa. We have 4th position ICTs and many other conditions. We are doing a very good macroeconomic balance, governance. We are doing reforms in administration, in the fiscal arena, in the incentives for economic investment and so on and so on. We have a very huge regulated framework with a rule of law country and institution working, but then at the end of the day, we don't see much foreign direct investment coming. Then there is a question of the size of the market, its attractiveness, and we need, now we infrastructure the country. We have roads, we have deep sea water ports, we have telecommunication, we have energy, we have many other infrastructures, and now we are looking for partnership to make the economic governance of those infrastructures and to allow the country to be less dependent from ODA or from other sources. It's a mix of questions and considerations. I thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. I will come back to the panel and then we'll open for another round of questions. Honorable Minister, do you want to start by picking a few of those questions, responding to them?
Thank you, Daniel. Ambassador of Mali, we have even not reached the preconditions that I listed. But you have to be ambitious. We don't have yet a good long-term planning. I did a big effort to have in my own ministry, and I put everyone to work, to Chile 2020. And I asked the Minister of Planning and others, do you have a 2020 vision of the country? No. So, in fact, more and more, under conditions of world uncertainty, you need a group of people within your country that start thinking medium term, long term, and connect that with policies today. Because if you study the future, disconnected from the present, nobody will pay attention to the future. It has to deal with the present. So when you think the future, it must be linked to the present, because you make decisions today. So it's an ambitious view what I expressed here, but you need to know which are your preconditions. That's what I think a point that I wanted to make consideration. And then a second concept depends very much on the level of development of the country. At the beginning, all Latin American countries, as Africa today, is putting much of the emphasis in the state. The state does the investment. So once you have some level of institution building and investment, we are entering the PPP. Because to have private-public partnership, you need a public sector strong. You cannot do business with the private sector if you don't have a strong public sector, because otherwise nobody will trust the private sector. So that's a second condition. So therefore, we launched, for instance, a program called Caminos Básicos, basic roads, that were really very not expensive at all, and you follow the same road. It's not paved. And you pave that with something smaller, with the population around, but you start connecting people that were either the dust or the mud in winter and summer. But then their life changed a lot. So, but that's much less expensive. So you need to combine one thing with the other according to the level of development. Concerning, and that has to do with what Ambassador Buganda said, that you need to reach small farmers. They have to get their products out to go to the market. So these probably small roads paved, and you have to keep maintenance. That's very important to have a system that does that. Has a very important impact not only for big business, but for the smaller ones that you make distribution of income through that way. And just a comment on what Ambassador Cabo Verde mentioned. Technical assistance is critical. I think much of this has to do with the role of international organizations. Those international organizations are not doing well their role. They have to adapt what the countries are needing and what's going on in the world. And if they can support you to build a unit that can negotiate with the private sector using experience of others, if they can help you with technicians to design the project, to negotiate the conditions, and then to maintain the road, because if you build the road and it's destroyed in 10 years, why to do that investment? That's also a very large inefficiency. that probably is not included in your data. That's much larger when you destroy it. So the system must keep, and the PPP has this advantage that you give the guy the concession that he has to keep, and if he doesn't keep, you change the norms and you change the conditions. And the size of the country finally is important, but I have to tell you that Chile is not the largest country in South America. While the Brazilians are 200, the Mexican more than 100, 110, 120, the Colombians and Argentinians are approaching 50 each. We are 17. So it depends on the sophistication. I would say if you reach a little bit more sophisticated, even a small country can get for specific projects this kind of support.
Good. Amadou.
Yeah, if I just can add, I think you know, for a long time, right? So I used to be at the IMF, and over 15, 16 years, the focus was on stability, macroeconomic stability, financial stability. But I think the African community has, policymakers have really strongly pushed for this transformational agenda, right? So you have these institutions that are still focused on stability, that suddenly realize that the continent is moving towards transformation and infrastructure. And I think there is increasingly a recognition that transformation is something that we cannot forget now. I mean, I think at the IMF they are really realizing that countries need to transform. But then that brings again to this notion of ownership. I think with a long-term strategy, I think it's important to separate the financing for the long-term strategy. Even if the financing is not coming, I think it's important to really push for a long-term strategy in terms of priorities. Now, and showing also and questioning them in terms of saying, well, in the debate, well, what is your assessment of the multiplier effect of this infrastructure? We think it's a big multiplier. We think that building these roads and these railroads is going to increase growth, reduce inequalities. What is your view? If you're saying that we are borrowing and to build infrastructure and the debt is too much, but show us in your debt sustainability analysis that you've taken into account the growth that we will have if we invest in infrastructure. And I think that elevating the debate and would be push them to be a bit more, I wouldn't say open-minded, but make the debate more constructive. But I know that one argument that is going to come again and again from this institution is about the quality of public investment. That they will come again and again. So, but I think there are ways to circumvent that. I'm a strong believer in regional projects. So we've seen some regional corridors and so on. I think that helps really reduce governance problems, that brings the scale, and that brings the network economies, these regional projects. And now, there are also, I believe, into looking at sectors, like in the mobile phone, I know that you can, for example, send money from Mali to Cote d'Ivoire using your cell phone. So that's something, you know, these new technologies, the renewables, that can attract also financing because of the sector. In terms just of the small economy, I don't know if there's somebody from Rwanda, but Rwanda is also small, is betting on the East African community, 140, 150 million people. So I think that's also, well, in the West it's a bit more complicated, there's a language barrier and so on, but with the sophistication, once the sophistication is there and the stability is all of that, I think having Cabo Verde also, I'm saying that to compete against my own country, but having Cabo Verde as a hub for all the way to the ECOWAS would make sense. Thanks. Don't forget Senegal.
We have about 20 minutes. Yeah. So if you can make brief comments and then we go for one more round.
Yes, briefly. First of all, to the Ambassador Murray mentioned about whether the project is really worth before the paying back. And well, we are very much, how can I say, focusing on the outcome or the result of the project. We are doing ex-ante project evaluation, ex-post evaluation, and we are open to public as a publication and putting the grade from A to E. So such kind of evaluation, I think, is focusing on the real outcome of the project. It is not necessarily lead to the final macroeconomy, but at least as a project level, we are very much focusing on what we did, whether it really works or not. And if you have any question or complaint, please let us know. And as to the question of the Ambassador Campbell about the comment about the technical assistance should come with money. And fortunately, our institution has both loan operation and also technical assistance operation. And when we do some kind of project, we are always thinking the necessity of the technical assistance. And we are more focusing recently on the preparation of the project. And like I said, the money comes really last. The preparation is really, really necessary. And to spend preparation, we need grant money. And I'm not saying bad about the World Bank or some other institution, but for those institutions, to find grant money is rather difficult. They need to find some kind of fund, grant fund, in order for the preparation of the project. But fortunately, we have, within our resources, we have such kind of money, so we are doing really hard to make our technical assistance connecting to the loan operation. And again, if you feel any complaint or something toward our operation, please let me know. And thank you very much for your comment, a good comment on our power sector operation.
One more round of questions. My board member, Frank Yan.
Thank you, Daniel. I'm Frank Young, board member with a partnership, and I'd like to join the other speakers or the other questioners in thanking the panel, and particularly you, Minister Guitar, for being with us this afternoon, sharing Chile's experience. Quick question for you, Mr. Guitar. In your paper, you make reference to the special challenges of harmonizing regulatory regimes, tariff regimes, for projects that cross borders, for projects that are regionally based. And in a lot of infrastructure projects in Africa, many of them, many of the larger ones, transport and energy, are likely to be regional. And these present a special layer of challenge in addition to all the other ones that you laid out in your presentation. I had experience with this a decade and a half ago on an energy project in West Africa. And in fact, we spent most of our time trying to harmonize the regulatory, the tariff, and some of the non-trade barrier issues that involved the crossing of borders for gas and for electricity. So I'm wondering if you can share with us Chile's experience or your experience with dealing with this issue of harmonizing some of these regulatory regimes when you do have regional-based projects.
Okay. Two more questions, and then we'll come back to the panel. And I think it was the Ambassador Mali who also talked about the regional nature of infrastructure related to ECOWAS. Yes, my friend.
Yeah, thank you. Ambassador Benin. Thank you very much for all this information you bring to us. I think there is one more information I need is about the return on investment. I think the public-private partnership is also about how the private company can get back its funds. And I think we didn't talk too much about this aspect, this part of the thing. We as, developing country, a country like Benin, we don't have, not yet, raw materials. And I think that's the reason why the private sectors, the private companies invest more in some countries like South Africa, like Nigeria, because they have these raw materials to get, to help, it helped the private companies to get their money back. So the countries like Benin, to get this money back, you have to increase the tax and taxation. You have to increase the the way the population pay the product by taxing more the product. Or if I take the case of the road about the toll, you have to put a toll who can be, I mean, a higher toll to get this money back. So how to make this back, how to put an because that means for the countries like Benin, when you have a private partnership, that means a higher interest rate for the agreement between the private and the public sector. So how to challenge those things? Thank you.
Thank you. One more question. And then we'll get back. All right. Honorable Bita, there are questions about regional cross-border infrastructure and how you deal with that. And then the question on the return on investments. And then we'll come down to the panel.
Okay. I will mention 3 points. One, about harmonizing regulations. It's very difficult. We have now specifics. We are building 2 tunnels, or we plan to build 2 tunnels between Chile and Argentina through the Andes. So, well, we have a law for concessions. They have a law for concessions. So we are planning to build the biggest tunnel that if we do it, I don't know if in 10, 20 more years it will be done, but we are starting to discuss how to harmonize the regulation of both, who will pay each part, and in the company that comes, will have to deal with both, so they have to have specific rules. So a few years ago there was a binational agreement. Again, the 2 presidents signed an agreement so that we can add this kind of projects through a specific commission for each project that will try to put both together and or harmonize. We are doing a second tunnel without the concession laws. The 2 governments will put the money. That's easier. You put 2/3 because it's 1/3 in my area, 2/3 in yours. You manage that to do the tunnels, but it's not easy because it has to do also with environmental policies. We signed, I was in the Senate at the time, and I voted in favor of a new mining agreement with Argentina, Chile and Argentina. And we have started after many years, 1 big mine in the border. That it's, the ore are in both sides. So the discussion of where to produce, the water, where the water will come, the residues, the waste, where it will be placed. It's big negotiations, and there are glaciers there, so the people started reacting against doing this business. So it has many, many aspects, but it has to be specific, to my understanding, and to harmonize both laws on specific projects. And I think it's possible to do, but not easy at all. That's my first reaction. For the second point concerns how it makes that profitable for the private sector, and how do they get their money back? Well, I said something, but anyhow, let us say we are going to build this 300 kilometers road, and that will cost approximately, it's $4 million, $5 million a kilometer. Yeah, so let's say $1 billion. They have to compete. So in the discussions, you decide with all the guys that are wanted to bid, the Germans, the Swedes, the Spanish, the Chileans, the Colombians, the Mexicans. So you say, that's the project, those are the conditions, you discuss with them, and then you say, well, those are the horizon, 25 years, that's the projection of the demand, that's much more or less, you have to calculate what you can get from that, and then who will request less subsidy from the state to do that. So they compete and they say, I do it asking for $20 million, the other would say to 200 million. And when the period is ended, you go back again to the same process. You can use your capital, that state capital, and you revalue that capital. You call for another bid for another 20 years. Now, in some cases, you need to put more money. The lower the income, more money from the state. In other cases, you use the so-called shadow toll. So it's not something that the people really pay, it's the state that is paying. For instance, we moved our system to jails. We started constructing, building jails. But the security of the jail will be in the hands of the state. But the maintenance, the food, and many things was concession to a private sector company. There are companies specialized in that. So we calculate what would be the shadow toll, and of course the prisoner will not pay for himself, so he doesn't pay at all, so the state has to pay. We move in the same way for hospitals. So we called for bidding for concessions, private, public, in the hospitals, and we have built some. The first one just are being inaugurated in these years. So we have to see how it works, but there is a big fighting with the workers of the public sector. They would say, no, that's as the state provides the health service. How these guys? So you do the concession in terms of what is called without white clothes. That means that the medicine is done by the state, but the maintenance, the towels, the hotel that is there, whatever it is by the private sector. So you find ways and you have to negotiate. You see the experiences of others. And the third point I want to make is projects. If you don't have projects, you cannot do things well. You need to have much more people working in designing new projects. You have to put incentives on the private sector to design projects. The state must have lots of engineering, because if you know where to go and you don't have projects how to materialize that road, you cannot move.
Peter has a comment.
I know we're about ready to break up here in a few minutes, and I wonder if, along with responding to some of the questions that have just been raised, if the panel could speculate, maybe that's the right word, as to where we might go next. This is hardly the forum on which you can sort of say, okay, let's concretely agree to this and that. But I know that there is interest from some of the Africans here, but because of the short time frame we had to call this meeting, I know there are a number of other countries who would like to have been here. We, in the partnership, greatly appreciate the expertise and interest of Chile. It's so excellent to have our Japanese colleague here. But can we sort of speculate as to what we might, how we might move this ball?
Tesla has an idea.
The ambassador from Mali a while ago suggested.
Okay.
I'm not very good at this. Okay. Right. The ambassador from Mali suggested a while ago a truism. He said, sometimes I feel our government, we should, the IMF and the World Bank come in, we just have to listen to them. We don't have anything to contribute. And when you think about that, there is often an unbalanced relationship. Two very powerful international institutions with a relatively small and relatively weak government is not exactly the best negotiating position for a Malian minister to be in. I don't envy you. But there is another way about that, and again, I turn to Chile. Experience I had in Latin America, I was in Costa Rica. The Costa Ricans were in difficult negotiating situations. What did they do? They reached out to the Chileans. They brought in advisors on their account, on their budget, to advise them how to deal with the IMF and the World Bank and the different issues that they were facing, or to learn from their experience. And again, this is sort of talking about the South-South dialogue. There's nothing constraining any of your countries from turning around and calling on Chile or calling on some other country and beginning that dialogue independently of the multilaterals that are, you don't want to offend and you're very dependent upon, but you want to have a stronger and voice in your dialogue. And that is an important consideration that I immediately picked up when you made your somewhat depressed comment there. I know it's not true, but there is some element of truth in that. So, in conclusion, getting more South dialogue with different partners, whether in Africa or beyond Africa, is really important as you look forward to the next 10 years.
The partnership is interested in working with the African Diplomatic Corps, working with African institutions. We have started conversation with the NEPAD, Planning and Coordinating Agency. We are planning to start conversation with the African Union on how to do this. Because there is power in observing what has become successful and trying to figure out how you can learn from that, how you can leverage that experience. And it's not stuff that you read in the books. These are things that you can go out. In fact, we have been starting to discuss with the Deputy Ambassador of Chile, who's sitting right here, Ambassador Hurtado, about maybe organizing a tour to Chile. And maybe we can take some of the African ambassadors and African ministers and technical teams from Africa to go and see and visit and discuss. Philippines, we talked to them about geothermal. Philippines is #2 in geothermal production in the world. Helped by USAID from the beginning, worked with the United States, but built its own capacity to develop geothermal energy. And so one thing that we haven't discussed here, and I thought, Honorable Minister, you'll talk about it, I know Peter is very passionate about it, is the whole idea of human capacity. How do you train capable engineers and linesmen and all the workers you need to really transform the infrastructure sector? And this is a conversation that the partnership has been carrying forward in terms of how we do that in Africa. So Africa has the capacity in-house to do these kinds of activities. Amadou, you want one last comment, and then
I fully agree with what you said. I mean, to me, it's just coming back to the fact that the more I look at these issues, the more I'm convinced that regional integration is the way to go. And so one way to strengthen the regional institutions like AU, NEPAD, ECOWAS, and also build a capacity, I think African Development Bank too, is something really that should be a priority.
Absolutely. My last comment, and then we bring this to a close.
Thank you very much. As I said in the beginning, I'm not an African specialist, but I just remember the small talk about the development of this TICAD. The first TICAD at that time, it was like a meeting to divide how much goes to each country or each kind of sector, kind of things, and unilateral from donor to recipient country. But as time goes by, the characteristics changed. And there are more and more voice from the partner countries, and recently even they were to hold their own TICAD in African territory, African continent. So such kind of initiative from the African country is very much important, I think. What you'd like to do, in which way, and then we'd like to think about how we can partner with you, including the private sector. So it's not so easy to break up something and go for the real good way, but I think such kind of dialogue with the initiative of yourself is quite helpful for the partner country like us, and we'd like to meet you in TICAD in 2 years.
Thank you so much.
I would say, Daniel, that we all know Daniel is tireless. Is that not true, Sergio? In his pursuit of everybody getting him involved. Tireless, and I think we've had a good discussion here, build upon some previous discussions. We need to then we've got some ideas. We need to get us together to drive it to some concrete possibilities. And thank you for all you do, Daniel. Thank you for everyone's participation. I don't mean to close it off, but that basically, Daniel, I think we're all anxious to begin to think concretely about this.
Peter, that is exactly what I was going to say, that it is very difficult in one meeting to be able to, not just listen to all these excellent presentations, but figure out the next steps. It seems like this will be a continuous conversation we would like to have with members of the diplomatic corps, and maybe what we can do is take the conversations we've had in the past and some of the conversation we are continuing to have with Chile and also with Nepal, and maybe sit down with a few of you and try to concretize those, because the more practical it is, then the more reachable it can be. And so with that in mind, if you allow me, Your Excellencies, I will bring this close as a part of a series of conversations to continue. And we thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us. And also we have some guests from the private sector with us. Honorable Minister Marius, thank you for attending our event, and we will continue this conversation. Thank you so much. We have some refreshments. We have some refreshments, exchange business cards.